The wind howled across the white, endless plains like a wounded beast, tearing through the pine trees and battering the small wooden cabin that stood alone against the storm. Snowflakes, thick as feathers, danced violently in the air, coating everything in sight. Inside that little cabin, the faint glow of firelight flickered against the log walls, and the air smelled of burning pine wood and simmering broth. Sarah Miller, a young widow in her early 30s, stirred a pot over the fire, her face pale from exhaustion and worry. Her husband had passed 2 winters ago, leaving her to raise their 2 sons, Ethan and Caleb, in this remote stretch of Wyoming. The land was harsh, the winters cruel, but she had learned to survive with a quiet strength that came only from loss. Her hands were calloused. Her eyes carried the soft sadness of someone who had known too much pain and still chose to hope each morning. Outside, the storm grew fiercer. The windows rattled as gusts of wind tried to pry their way in. Sarah glanced at her boys, both bundled in thick wool coats, helping her stack wood near the fireplace. Ethan, the older one, was only 10 but had the seriousness of a man. Caleb, barely 8, was smaller, gentler, and often scared of the howling wind. "Mama," Caleb whispered. "The snow's getting louder." Sarah smiled faintly, trying to ease his fear. "It's just winter talking, sweetheart. She likes to remind us who's boss." But even as she said it, her heart was uneasy. Winter didn't just talk, it could kill. Then through the roar of the wind came a faint sound, a low, distant thud, something heavy falling in the snow. Sarah froze, her ladle dripping soup into the flames. Ethan straightened up, his ears sharp. "Did you hear that?" he asked. She nodded slowly. The sound came again, closer this time. It wasn't an animal. It was heavier, human. Without hesitation, Ethan rushed to the window and squinted into the storm. "There's something out there, Ma. I think it's a man." Sarah's heart skipped. A man? Out here in this blizzard? That could only mean one thing, someone lost, someone dying. Without another word, she grabbed her coat and lantern. "Stay here," she ordered. But Ethan, determined, shook his head. "Ma, you can't go alone." Caleb's voice trembled. "Please don't go, Mama." Sarah hesitated, torn between fear and compassion. But her late husband, John, had always said, "If someone's in trouble, you help 'em. That's what makes a Miller." She nodded to her sons. "Fine, but stay close." The 3 of them pushed the door open, and a wall of freezing wind hit them. Snowflakes stung their faces like needles. But through the swirling white, Ethan's lantern caught something, a dark shape half buried in the snow. Not far from the barn, they trudged forward, boots sinking deep into the drifts, until they reached him, a cowboy, sprawled face down in the snow, his hat blown away, his horse nowhere in sight. His coat was stiff with ice, his skin ghost pale. Sarah dropped to her knees beside him. "Sir, can you hear me?" No response. She touched his neck, faint pulse.
"He's alive," she breathed.
"Ethan, help me lift him." "Caleb, open the door when we get close." The boys obeyed without hesitation, their small hands gripping frozen fabric as they helped drag the stranger through the snow, step by step, toward the cabin. By the time they stumbled inside, the fire had nearly gone out, and the man's lips were blue. They laid him on the old iron bed by the window, wrapping him in thick blankets. Sarah moved fast, adding wood to the fire, heating water, removing his soaked coat. She noticed a gun holstered at his side, and a star-shaped badge tucked under his vest. A lawman, she realized. The snowstorm raged on outside as Sarah worked through the night. She rubbed warmth into his hands, pressed a wet cloth to his forehead, and spooned warm broth near his lips. The boys watched from the corner, whispering to each other. "Do you think he's a bad man?" Caleb asked softly. Ethan shook his head. "He's got a badge. Maybe he's a sheriff." Sarah heard them but didn't answer. Her focus stayed on the stranger's breathing. It was shallow, uneven. She prayed silently. "Lord, don't let this man die under my roof." Hours passed. The storm howled without mercy. But just before dawn, when the first faint light began to creep through the frosted window, the man stirred. His eyes opened, blue, sharp, confused. He tried to sit up but groaned, clutching his side. "Easy," Sarah said, her voice firm but gentle. "You're safe now. You were caught in the storm." He blinked, trying to piece together what had happened. His voice was rough as sandpaper. "My horse went down near the ridge. Thought I could make it." His words trailed off as he looked around the small cabin. then at the woman and her 2 sons watching him. Ethan stepped forward bravely. "We found you, mister. You were almost buried." The cowboy managed a weak smile. "Guess I owe you one, kid." Sarah handed him a bowl of warm soup. "Drink this. You'll need your strength." As he sipped, color slowly returned to his face. He studied her with quiet gratitude. "Name's Luke Carter," he said finally. "Marshal out of Jackson County." Sarah nodded, though she'd already guessed he was law. "I'm Sarah Miller. These are my boys, Ethan and Caleb." Luke's gaze softened as he looked at the 2 children. Then at Sarah. "You saved my life." "Ma'am?" She shook her head. "My boys did. They saw you first." Luke smiled faintly. "Then I reckon I owe all 3 of you." For a moment, the cabin fell quiet except for the crackle of fire and the sigh of wind outside. But beneath that quiet, something invisible had already begun to take root. A fragile thread between the weary widow, her brave sons, and the stranger they'd rescued from the snow. None of them could have known that by saving his life that night, they had also changed their own forever. And as the firelight flickered across their faces, Sarah couldn't shake the strange feeling that this man had been sent for a reason, that fate had guided him through. By the time the sun broke through the storm clouds the next morning, the world outside the cabin had turned into a glittering field of white. The storm had passed, leaving behind silence so deep that even the crows dared not cry. The mountains gleamed under a pale golden light. Smoke curled softly from the cabin's chimney, and the faint sound of children's laughter echoed from inside, a rare sound these days, one Sarah hadn't heard since before her husband died. Inside, the warmth from the crackling fire filled the small home. The stranger, Luke Carter, sat propped up in bed, his bandaged arm resting on a pillow, his hat resting nearby on a chair. His rugged face, still pale from fever, carried years of dust, wind, and battle, but there was something honest in his eyes, something that made Sarah uneasy and comforted all at once. Ethan was showing him a small wooden horse he had carved himself, a toy he'd made last summer when the loneliness became too much. "I whittled this with Pa's knife," Ethan said proudly. Luke smiled, his voice still rough. "You've got a steady hand, boy. That's good work." Ethan beamed under the praise, and Sarah, watching from the stove, felt a strange stirring in her chest, a mix of gratitude and sorrow. Luke's presence had brought a kind of warmth that had been missing since her husband's death. She tried to shake the thought. He was just a stranger she'd helped, nothing more. Luke looked around the cabin, taking in the neatly kept room, the patchwork quilts, the few simple things that made up their lives. "You folks living out here alone?" he asked. Sarah nodded quietly. "My husband John built this place. After he passed, there wasn't anywhere else to go." Luke's gaze softened. "That's mighty strong of you, ma'am. Not many would stay." She gave a small smile. "When you've got 2 boys counting on you, you don't get to run. You just keep doing what needs doing." Her words struck something deep in Luke's heart, a memory of his own mother, who had said almost the same thing when his father died in a gunfight years ago. Caleb, the younger boy, approached shyly with a steaming cup of broth. "Mama said you should drink this, Mr. Luke. It'll make you strong again." Luke chuckled softly and accepted it. "Thank you, partner." The boy's eyes lit up. "Partner?" Luke nodded. "Sure thing. Anyone who helps me fight off a storm like that earns the title." The boy grinned ear to ear. Sarah turned away quickly, hiding the small smile tugging at her lips. The day passed slowly, the sun hanging low, melting the edges of snow from the cabin's roof. Luke rested, spoke little, but his eyes followed Sarah as she worked, feeding the fire, mending clothes, teaching her boys their letters by the window. There was a quiet grace in everything she did. Her voice, though firm, had gentleness in it,